Late 1945. The Second World War had just ended. The atomic age had just begun. In a large craftsman house in Pasadena, California, a man who had spent the war inventing rocket fuel was preparing to do something that had nothing to do with science. His name was Jack Parsons. He was 31 years old. He held a government security clearance, led one of the most productive research programs in American aerospace, and had recently become convinced that the next phase of human history would not be determined by politics or technology. It would be determined by whether someone could successfully perform a specific ritual working that had never been successfully completed before. He intended to be that someone. To understand what Parsons was attempting requires understanding what he believed the world was. Parsons was a Thelemite. Thelema was the philosophical and magical system developed by Aleister Crowley in the early 20th century, built on the central axiom that every human being has a true will, a singular authentic purpose, and that the entire project of a life should be the discovery and fulfillment of that purpose. The law of Thelema was a single instruction: do what thou wilt. This was not, in Crowley's framing, permission to do anything you pleased. It was an obligation to find the thing you were genuinely meant to do and pursue it without deviation. Most people, in Crowley's view, spent their entire lives doing what others willed for them. Thelema was the antidote. Within this system existed a figure called Babalon, not a demon, not a devil, a cosmic force, the great feminine liberator, the intelligence that dissolved ego and returned consciousness to its source. Crowley had written about her extensively. He had built her into the cosmological architecture of Thelema as a figure of enormous significance. But he had not, in Parsons' assessment, done what needed to be done about her. Parsons believed that the next stage of human evolution required Babalon's direct intervention in the physical world, not as metaphor, not as internal mystical experience, as actual presence, an embodied force operating through a specific human being who had been prepared and called for exactly that purpose. He called this person the Scarlet Woman. She would be his magical partner, his complement in the working, and through their combined effort, something would change in the structure of reality itself. What exactly would change Parsons described in broad terms: a new age, a loosening of the forces that kept human consciousness imprisoned, a shift that would be felt whether or not anyone understood its source. He designed the ritual himself, drawing on Crowley's system, on the Enochian framework John Dee had developed 3 centuries earlier, and on his own substantial practical experience with ceremonial magic. He planned it for January 1946. He selected a site in the Mojave Desert for the initial phase. He needed a scribe, someone to document what happened in real time, to maintain the witnessing function that ceremonial tradition required. He chose the man who was living in his spare room, a Navy veteran and aspiring writer named L. Ron Hubbard. The working began on January 4th, 1946. Parsons went to the desert alone for the first sessions, reciting calls in the Enochian language, performing the physical ritual elements he had designed, and returning to write detailed notes on everything he observed. The notes are not mystical in tone. They read like experimental logs, atmospheric conditions, sensory observations, anomalies noted and categorized. On the second night, the wind picked up suddenly and put out the candles. He relit them and continued. On the 5th night, he wrote that he heard a voice. He did not panic. He addressed it using the ritual protocol he had prepared. He asked it to identify itself. He recorded what he believed it said. He went back the next night. By the 7th night, Parsons had shifted the working to the parsonage. Hubbard was present as scribe, seated outside the ritual space with a journal, recording events as Parsons described them. The sessions lasted hours. Hubbard wrote everything down. What Hubbard wrote has never been made public. What Parsons wrote is documented extensively. He described escalating contact, increasing clarity, a sense that the working was functioning exactly as designed. He wrote to Crowley describing each development in the same field report tone he used for rocket test documentation. Crowley's responses grew progressively more concerned. He wrote that the working appeared to be producing results. He wrote that results of this kind required careful handling. He wrote that he was not in a position to supervise from England, and that this troubled him. He used the word alarming. Parsons kept going. On the 11th night, January 15, 1946, Parsons concluded the primary phase of the working. He had not yet found the Scarlet Woman. He had not yet produced the physical manifestation he had designed the ritual to achieve. But he wrote in his notes that the working was complete in the sense that mattered, that he had established contact, that he had opened something, and that what came next was not in his hands. 2 days later, a woman knocked on the door of the parsonage. Her name was Marjorie Cameron. She was 23 years old. She had recently been discharged from the Navy, where she had worked as a cartographer. She had red hair. She told Parsons she had felt pulled toward Pasadena without being able to explain why. She had no prior connection to him, to the house, or to Thelema. Parsons had written a letter to Crowley before she arrived, describing the Scarlet Woman he expected the working to produce. The letter is dated before Cameron knocked on the door. It describes her. He wrote to Crowley that evening. He wrote that the working had succeeded. What followed was not what he had planned. Parsons and Cameron became partners in every sense, personal, magical, and creative. She was extraordinary by any account, an artist of real power and a personality that left everyone who knew her with a strong impression. Whether she believed the working had called her, she stayed. Whether she understood what Parsons believed she was, she accepted it. The second phase of the working began. Parsons believed the Scarlet Woman having arrived, the next ritual could proceed, the one that would complete the working and produce its full effect on the world. He and Cameron performed it together. Cameron became pregnant. She later miscarried. Parsons did not record grief. He recorded a clinical observation about timing. He wrote that the working was not over. He wrote that he intended to continue. He did not continue, not in the way he had planned. Within weeks, Hubbard had left Pasadena with Cameron's predecessor, Sarah Northrup, and the funds from a joint business venture he and Parsons had established. Parsons attempted a legal remedy and recovered some of the money. He attempted a magical remedy, an invocation of the martial spirit Bartzibal, designed to produce disaster at sea. Hubbard's yacht was forced back to port by a sudden storm. Hubbard did not return. The Agape Lodge fractured. Crowley died in December 1947, leaving no successor with the authority to validate or contextualize what Parsons had done. The security clearance revocation came in 1952. The explosion came in June of that year. What Parsons accomplished with the Babalon working is not a question the historical record can answer. What it can answer is this. A man with a scientist's mind designed a ritual working of extraordinary ambition, executed it with methodical precision, documented everything, and maintained until his death that it had worked. The woman he believed it called arrived before he could have known she was coming. The man who watched it all happen went on to found a religion. The government that employed him watched every night of the working in real time and kept portions of what they saw classified for decades afterward. The working was either the most elaborate coincidence in the history of American occultism, or was something else. Jack Parsons was certain it was something else. He was certain enough to spend the rest of his life living inside that certainty, regardless of what it cost him.